Hello everybody and welcome back to Throttle Grotto. This week we're going to be building an exhaust system for the Datsun Roadster. Stay tuned. Alright everybody, so this week I'm working in the Datsun again. I'm still waiting for brake parts to show up, so I won't have that video done for a little bit yet. But I decided to work on the exhaust system because I had nearly everything here to do it. So I've already started on a few things and got a few things done off camera, but I'll show you what I've done and what I used to do it, and then we'll build the main part of the exhaust system. And I'll show you some of the things that are a little bit different about the Datsun when it comes to putting an exhaust on here. A little bit different than a normal car. But I'm under the car now, and you can see one of the things that is probably one of the biggest things that is different about these cars is this right up. There we go, that's better. Is this hole right here. That's actually an ovalized hole in the chassis, in the frame. That's the exhaust passes through. And this is actually the piece of exhaust tubing that passes through the frame. Now this is like an 1 7/8" tubing, and you can see that it's actually been crushed to fit through that oval. I'm not doing a very good job of showing you. See, there we go. So about 8 inches in the center here is crushed. Now I'm going to be using 2-inch exhaust on this whole exhaust system, with the exception of where I put the flanges off the header and the flex pipe. So I'll show you guys that right now because that's already built. Okay, so this is the part that I've already built, and I've bolted it into the car. So it's a 2.5-inch flange that steps down to a 2 1/4. Oh, I got my fingers in the way. 2 1/4 flex pipe to another piece that tapers down to 2-inch. And then we have our first frame pass through, which is right here. And I've already crushed one piece of tubing to make a piece that goes through there. And that kind of slips into the piece there. So we need to make one more piece of crushed tubing to go through this. You can really see that pretty well from this angle, that ovalized pass through in the frame. So we need to make another piece that goes here and then attach here, and then we need to build the whole loop that goes over the rear axle and then exits out the rear, and come up with a muffler solution. Okay, for larger diameter, like 2.5, you can buy ovalized tubing, but in smaller diameters you can't. So I basically just made some marks on here where the taper started and stopped, and kind of transferred that over to my tube here, and I'm going to center that up in the vise, and I'm just going to use these blocks of wood to pinch it down with the vise, and hopefully get it to about the same thickness so it fits in there just like it did originally. Alright, so now you can see I've got a nice flat bend in that pipe. It's not going to restrict the flow at all because it's ovalized. It's got a nice taper to it. So this will actually fit through the frame really well as opposed to the round tube. And it has a very, very similar thickness to the original pipe. Just a little bit wider in the oval section, but I'm not too worried about that. Okay, so let's slip this through the frame with one hand. So you can see there with the 2-inch pipe, it doesn't leave much room for error. But get down to that oval section, we have so much room for activities with the 2-inch ovalized. So that's about where that is going to sit, and it's going to give us a little bit of room here for our muffler, and then maybe a little bit of an extension piece off the muffler to match up there. And then back here we will start fabricating our over the axle section. All right, so this is our original 1 7/8" or whatever size this is set up. And this is going to be our new setup. Pretty easy how that works when I already cut everything before I started filming. But for information's purposes, this all came out, with the exception of the longer pieces, this all came out of one solid 180-degree bend. So if you buy one 180-degree bend, you can do all this with a couple of extra pieces of tubing. So let's tack this together and see how it looks. I'm going to do this with one hand holding the camera and one hand holding the exhaust. So this is our spot in the back here where we need to join up right there. We're going up and over the axle and coming out between the fuel tank and the leaf spring, just like the factory does. Now I've got it pitched over just a little bit because just because my hand needs the room up there. Sorry, everything's kind of awkward and tight here doing this all one-handed. But if I bring it over so it's centered in there, everything still lines up pretty good. So, all right, everybody. So I told you I was getting a tiny muffler, and I totally did. This might quite possibly be the tiniest muffler I've ever seen. I got it on Amazon. It's a total flow muffler, and part number 642. So it's a little tiny stainless muffler. I don't know how much it's going to really do, but it's going to fit the car really nicely because it's small and compact. So this is one of the next pieces that I got to put in. All right, so I probably had room for 2 tiny mufflers down here, but that's okay. So where we're at now is I've got my downpipe, the piece through the frame with a couple pieces of cardboard to kind of center it in the frame hole, and then tiny muffler, and then the next piece of tubing that goes all the way through there. And I picked up some clamps so that I can make some brackets to bolt to the factory locations here to help hold the exhaust in place. All right, everybody, so I took a bunch of time and just turned the camera off and worked on the exhaust for a while. I kind of needed to focus on what I was doing without any distractions. So I figured I'd catch you guys up and show you what I did, kind of how I did it, and where I'm at so far with the exhaust and some of the products I've used. All right, so let's go from front to back here, and I'll kind of explain what I did with the exhaust along the way. So I went with a 2.5-inch flange to match up to the factory flange, and then stepped that down to the 2.25 little shorty flex pipe here to kind of make sure we don't put a bunch of stress on the headers. And then 2.25 stepped down to a 2-inch, and then a little tiny flange that drops down to 2-inch with our flattened ovalized tube here that passes through the frame. And then we have this is a freeze plug that I bought from the auto parts store, and some aluminum bar stock I had laying around, drilled to accept the hose clamp or the exhaust clamp to the 2-inch exhaust clamp here, to our tiny muffler, to another sleeved clamp, to another ovalized tube, to the piece that is hanging down there that I built the other day. And then back here I have another freeze plug with a kind of an offset clamp situation here out of another piece of bar stock of aluminum that I had. So this isn't all tightened up yet, but it should be a very rigid exhaust with just a little bit of flex in it from the flex pipe up here. All right, so I'm sure there's a few of you out there that are screaming and throwing things at your computer right now. Let me explain why I built the exhaust the way I did. One of the things that I wanted to be able to do, which I might not have to do, but I wanted to be able to take the exhaust out of the car if I needed to. And with the ovalized hole that is in the frame, anything over 2-inch round doesn't want to pass through there. So getting tubes in and out of those holes in the frame is really difficult, especially with the way it's cross braced, and it's just not easy to get tubing in and out of there. So the reason I use some of those clamps, the wraparound clamps, is that I could actually get a seal all the way around the tube, as opposed to trying to weld the tube and twist it in place and all that kind of stuff. Just seems more reasonable to use a clamp. If I got to go back later and weld it, I will, but I prefer to stick with the clamp just in case I need to like get the exhaust out of the way for some reason to, let's say, do an engine swap or whatever. Something that could be an issue that I just wanted to resolve easily, and I figured a clamp, one of those sleeve clamps around the whole tube, has a better chance of sealing than me doing a terrible weld and missing a piece across the top and then having an exhaust leak. Because I'm sure some of you were like, freeze plug? What are you talking about, a freeze plug? So this, I'm sure many of you Datsun people will recognize this as a stock Datsun exhaust hanger. This one is probably 50 years old and has been on the car since it was new. As you can tell, it's kind of coming apart. It's obviously well past the end of its service life. So this is a Dorman. I got it at actually the hardware store, but it's the same one I sell at the local auto parts store. It's a Dorman 02602. A 1 3/8 to 1.5 inch freeze plug. It's 34 to 38 mil for you metric people out there. And you can see it's very similar in dimension, a little bit shorter than the stock one, but if you're making custom exhaust, it really doesn't matter anyway. So what I ended up doing for these custom exhaust mounts is, if you imagine this is your exhaust clamp, which it is your exhaust clamp, and then I just drilled some bar stock, put the nuts on to hold it in place, and then figured out where I needed to mount the rubber donut or the rubber expansion plug. And the key of that is having a lot of nuts and bolts around the shop. You can push this center nut out, remove that, and replace it with a standard bolt to make a really nice solid mount, a rubber mount for your exhaust. So the nice thing is I priced out things like this, and they were anywhere from $10 to $20 a piece. These were $4.49 a piece. So, and I already had the bar stock on the in a bin over here, so that didn't cost me anything. So I was able to save a little money, and hopefully you guys will too. So that is all for this episode. So I'm going to break the exhaust videos in half. Basically, the front half of the exhaust is the first one. The next video for the exhaust, we'll be working on this. And I am going to completely rebuild this muffler from the original 1 3/4 spec up to a 2-inch spec, with repairing all of the outside with all the outside damage, and putting new stuffing in it, and then welding it all back together. So I have a nice, I explained in one of the other videos, I really wanted to reuse this muffler somehow. It's completely impractical to do this, but it's a cool old piece. It's kind of original to the Datsuns, and it'd be kind of nice to be able to reuse it, and why not? So next episode, we're going to go through this whole muffler and rebuild it with all new stuff. So until next time, get out there and work on something.